Hey, hi. It feels good to be back. It was an amazing trip, and what I want to do today is I want to tell you a little about the trip, but I want to tell you just from my point of view so that maybe we can all join in and maybe change something about the way we live our lives today. Because I took a lot of our principles there to Bali, and when I was in Bali, it took my principles and reworked them. And it was a land of complete opposites. You have no idea how uncomfortable I was in Bali. But yet I was so uncomfortable, but I've never been so joyful or happy. I was so hungry, but I didn't like the food. So it was a land of opposites. And you know, one minute I would see the chaos of something and I would see the joy in something else. It was 2 weeks of being totally conflicted. And it was great. And I brought home a lot of substance from that because I realized that, you know, I live my life in a great deal of conflict. And I didn't really see it until I was over there. And then I realized it in the land of opposites. Man, I messed up. Because even though I think as good as I have it, it's as much as I think I have my stuff in order, I'm not even close. You'll see in a minute. It's just amazing. So I want to take you on a little journey. And yes, there are slides. But it's not like I'm just going to say, oh, and this was where we went, because there was a meaning behind everything that we did. And the first thing we had to do was understand that we're going to introduce change into our culture. When we got over there, like Laura said, I didn't have any expectations whatsoever about this trip. When I got on the plane, I just knew it was going to be a heck of a long flight over there. And I just thought, well, once I get there, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And I trusted Edward Vion, who's our Dr. Edward from the Santa Rosa Church, my mentor, my friend. He said, Joe, this will change your life. It will transform your life. And I'm like, yeah. Hear that all the time, right? That's what I tell people all the time. Yeah. Okay, we'll get it. But it really was. But the first thing we had to do was embrace some ideas of change how we were doing our everyday stuff. And this is what we did first. This is Edward on our very first day. On our very first day, we met, after we slept, we got in the night. The next morning, we would meet every single morning for spiritual chanting at 7:30 in the morning. Ooh. I know. Chanting for 30 minutes. When is the last time you chanted for 30 minutes? So as a group, we sat there and just like Edward going, look, you're here. You got to do it. He's sitting in his sarong and he's got his prayer beads on and we're all looking at him like, really? Really? I have to do spiritual practices every day? And after spiritual practices, there was an hour of yoga. But then we got to go to a breakfast buffet. Yay! And at least they had something American there. But then we had to go back for another hour of spiritual practices. That's like 2.5 hours. I don't do that ever. Now, I can tell you, I've been to Asilomar 14 times, but I've never, ever been this transformed by an experience because it required me to change all the ideas of the past. To be able to take these prayer beads and understand that we were going to say one prayer, we were going to chant one prayer in Balinese, and we were going to do it 108 times in a row. Yeah, I know. I'm like, just like Edward, really? But what's in front of Edward is really important. They call this the offering, and you see this everywhere you go. Everywhere you go, and I mean everywhere. Your lights up, please. Everywhere you go, you will see that little offering. And it's in front of every business. It's in front of their homes. There's a doctor's office at the hotel. And outside, when the doctor would come in, the offering would come out and the incense would be lit and the incense would just permeate the area. It was a way that they blessed their business, they blessed themselves, and they blessed everyone coming into their homes, their businesses. It was in front of the banks, and it was everywhere. If I saw one of these, we saw 10,000, right? For those of my people in Bali, we saw 10,000 of these things. They were everywhere. And it's because, you know what? They don't think about their spirituality on Sunday, and then they don't think about it just like during their morning meditation. It weaves into their every life. Every moment of their life, they weave this in. So periodically, you would see throughout the day people bringing these offerings and setting them outside. They would put them in front of the dentist's office, and in front of the massage places. They would put them in front of the vendors. Everything had this whole idea that they're blessed all the time. No matter what was going on inside, they were blessing the inside, the outside, and everybody around it. It was a magnificent change in culture. It was a change because we don't see people do that. We don't imagine walking down El Paseo and having to dodge these things everywhere you go. We don't even think about doing like that. But it's amazing how they would weave that into their culture. Now, and I'm not advocating that you all have to go out and burn incense and put flowers outside of your houses. But what I am saying is it's interesting to see how they weave their entire spiritual being into their every minute life. Not just on special occasions or when they think, oh, I should do this now. It's every day and in every way. So it was a real change for us. Nature obeys us as we first obey it. I came up with some Ernest Holmes quotes as I was thinking on this journey. And actually, it wasn't a trip. It wasn't a tour. It was a spiritual pilgrimage. For those of us who were on it, we understand what that means now. We went in thinking, oh, we're going to see a couple temples, hang out at some resorts, do some shopping. No. We did those things, but it was just immersed in this idea that there is something bigger happening in their lives, and we needed to connect to that. And it was a spiritual principle. Spiritual principles. Nature obeys us as we first obey it. It is an old saying and a true one. We learn the fundamental principles of a law, obey its mode of operation, and then have conscious use of it. They have a way of honing in on spiritual principle. And in fact, I think I said it on Dial an Idea this morning, that, anyone who does investment knows that it's really nice to take your principal and not touch your principal, but actually just kind of live off the interest. Which means don't touch the principle, don't mess with principle. Principle is what principle is. You can't manipulate it, you can't change it, it works. It's a law of cause and effect, and when you comply with it, when you obey with it, you reap the rewards. When you try to adjust it or try to manipulate it, you end up on the losing side and your principle goes down along with your interest. Does that make sense? Are you with me? All right, say, oh, no, never mind. This is where principle was really important to us. This is a view from our tour van. If you see in front of you, there's 1,000 motorcycles and no signs. Complete and utter chaos. The first few days we were in the van, I was in the front seat going just like this, going, ah! Literally, foot on the floorboard, hand grabbing the side, going, we're gonna die. We're gonna die. Because these people just weave in and out, right? But guess what? Didn't see one accident until the very last day, and that was because a woman just wiped out on her bike. You didn't see people hit each other. We sing in the silence, there's chaos and noise. And when you can actually get into the silence, there's a world of peace amongst the chaos and noise. They got it down. Now, the next one is a particularly interesting view, because they ride 4 people to a moped. It's commonplace to have an entire family on one bike, and the law says the driver has to have a helmet, but nobody else has to have a helmet. So the baby's like a baby airbag. And I'm looking at that. I'm just shocked the whole time going, it is so unsafe. It is so, I'm bringing my Joe to Bali. And yet they don't worry about it because guess what? They don't get hurt because I didn't see anybody flip anybody off. I didn't see anybody cussing anybody. They would weave in and out, and it was done with such grace and ease, but it was chaos at its best, but it was also organized chaos. I think about how my life could really benefit from some organized chaos. Instead of just chaos for chaos' sake, understanding that people are going to weave in and out of my experience, and I need to let them go with safe passage and not get angry if they cut me off. We never once saw our driver get angry. Now, the funny part about this picture, and I just noticed it this morning, is that our driver is texting. But not once. There were a couple times when literally I was in my seat, and he would go, Mr. Joe, it's going to be okay. It's going to be, Mr. Joe, it's okay. Mr. Joe, it's okay. And I'm like, what I learned was I need to calm down. So by the end of day 4, I'm like, whatever. Because I know we're not going to get in a wreck. No one's going to hit us. We're not going to hit them. God's in control, and they know how to weave. They know how to weave spirit into everything that they do. Their businesses, their driving. They don't think twice about this stuff. Why am I obsessed with it? Why do I worry about stuff all the time when they can just see spirit all the way through something? It was a valuable lesson for me because I realized, again, like I said just now, nature obeys us as we first obey it. And there's a principle. And when you understand its mode of operation, you have conscious use of it, which means I'm not really using it consciously to my advantage. I think I have been until I go to the land of contrasts and I see the vast differences of how they live and how I live in relation to that weaving of spiritual life into an everyday pattern. What I'm trying to do today is to bring home to you, more than anything, is just an understanding of how we can all go deeper. Like Laura said, our goal was to bring this home to you and to help share some things along the way. And now every week I'm not going to wear this, although I can tell it's extremely comfortable. I've never been cooler. And yes, I have something on underneath this. But never cooler, I know. But if it fell off, I would be really embarrassed. So I was thinking about the world of mental atmospheres and how when we were driving through the various cities, everything has its own mental atmosphere. Your homes, your cars, your relationships, your workplaces, they all have mental atmospheres. Dr. Holmes says mental atmosphere is the mental emanation of anything, any person, or any place. Everything has some kind of mental atmosphere. And so I was looking at, this is a typical home. Lights off, there you go. This is a typical home. Yeah. And they live on compounds. They live on compounds, which means the paternal father, the father's side, the generations will live on one piece of land, and they'll all build little places much like this. And there are more places like this than upscale places. This is like their regular style of living, which made us so appreciate the way we live here. The way we live here. Even living in our cars would be more comfortable than living in some of this stuff. You know, it's just dirt and it's hard. But I tell you what, these people outside of that is this. In order to get into their homes, you have to walk through the front. And the front is a temple. It's these shrines. It's their respect for their own lives. And out from that, you will see in the little corners, you probably can't see it, are offerings that are burning all the time, blessing people as they come and go into their homes. So what looks like on the inside, it doesn't matter. They don't care. They're quite happy in that culture. And it's not that they're happy and content. They just weave, it's God. It's all God happening. And they honor God all the time in their presence. So they're constantly walking by symbols, and I would call them symbols because we would call them symbols of their spiritual belief. Their grounds are covered with statues and reminders. And now we're not into, you don't see any statues and you don't see any symbols up here. But in my mind, what I kept thinking is whenever they're praying to the same God that I pray to, but they're praying through a different way. And that's totally cool. But I don't have to have the symbols. But whereas they use the symbols all the time as a constant reminder, maybe we should have some personal things that we choose as reminders around to remind us to live our spiritual life. Does that make sense? So it doesn't matter what's on the outside or on the inside. There was always God as a representation before you move in and out of every place. What if we had that in our homes and in our businesses? What if we had a symbol of our belief system? Or it doesn't have to be an outward symbol. It has to be an inward heart symbol. What if we had that in everything that we do? How would that change its mental atmosphere? Do you see what I'm saying? That's where I go back to the mental atmosphere. Everything and everyone has a mental atmosphere. And they have an interesting way of weaving this idea of love into everything. It doesn't move them the way things move us. They stay in that consciousness. It was amazing to see this. Next thing, how wonderful it is to know that the kingdom is within and not an external kingdom. This is wherever they have a natural phenomenon, they erect a temple. Okay? And in this particular temple, this is called the Bat Temple because beyond the yellow umbrella there is a cave. And in the cave is a black wall. And it's not a black wall painted black. It's a black wall because it's covered with bats. And I know. Trust me, I know. The first temple, Edward said, so the very first temple we're going to go to is the Bat and Rat Cave. I'm like, really? I flew 8,000 miles in 17 hours and you're taking me to the Bat Cave? Really? No. That sounds gross. It sounds gross. It sounds awful. That temple represents where you go to sacrifice or leave your troubles. It's a representation. So someone in my family at the time, we found out, was moving through a cancer experience. And so when we went there, we left the cancer there. It was something we left there. Within 5 minutes, that's what it looked like. Hundreds of school children came in, and part of their spiritual practices as children was to go to this temple and make whatever they want to get rid of, they got rid of it there. Again, they weave it into their day, even early on in their life. So here's a question for you. If I were to take you to the Bat Temple, and outside of hearing the bats and the action and the wall move and all that stuff, what would you leave? What would you leave? And I tell you what, it wasn't just a moment where you just went, I'll just leave it. It was transcendent because we really felt like we left something there and didn't come back to pick it up. And didn't come back. The kingdom of heaven is within. It's not an external. The Bat Rat Cave was disgusting, a land of opposites. What happens there? Truly sacred. Truly sacred. Does that make sense? We are the instrument in the office through that which is greater than we are performs the act of creation in us, through us, and for us. In this vast change in which we live, the flux and ebb, the flux and flow and ebb and tide of evolution, there is a constancy, a consistence. There is in the midst of all movement something which does not move and yet moves all things. In life, there is an ebb and a flow. If we can get into the ebb and flow, we would never have to worry because the thing that doesn't move is always going to be there for us as long as we don't worry about the ebb and flow of things. We have to learn to go with the flow. That's their whole culture, is to go with the flow. It was amazing. But so they took us to a temple, another temple, out in the middle of nowhere. What do? They say, oh, look, there's a phenomenon. This is the first temple that was established in the late 1600s, one of the first Hindu temples. And on the base of it, you would go in and a priest would bless you. You would go through this whole ritual. And then you would go up into the temple, and then we would go through the process of having our offering in front of us and go through the ritual of things. But what was interesting enough is that you're not connected to that. You have to walk through water to get that. So the tide has to be out so you can walk over. If you don't go with the ebb and flow, you get stuck on one side or the other. How's that about life? I think there's a life lesson just getting to the temple. Because in my life, if I don't go with the ebb and flow, sometimes I get really stuck on something. And I'm either stuck on the right side or stuck on the wrong side. I'm going, what am I doing? It was a real lesson for us, and for me particularly, to start to move with the ebb and flow and understand that there is an influx and an outflux, but something remains constant. That rock didn't move. I had to move. The universe, God is a constant. God doesn't have to move. We have to move into alignment with it. Does that make sense? And there we are. There's our pilgrimage. We actually walked across the water, and we helped each other, which was interesting. The rocks are slippery, so we were hanging on to one another, and meanwhile, we're wearing our because we're going to a ceremony, we had to wear a certain garb, and we had to help each other across those rocks and across the water, and it was a moving moment for everyone that was there. Again, there's this vast flow of energy in this life. There's an inflow and an outflow, and it moves all things, and yet the one thing that stays constant is the one thing that didn't move, and that for us is the law. See how I'm trying to draw the parallels between what we experience in Hinduism to what we do in science of mind? Are you with me? Are you bored to death? No, you're okay? Okay, good. That's good. It's really cool up here. I hope y'all are cool. All right. The human self-knowing mind is the perception of reality. It's unity with the whole of God and the conscious side of life. I don't want to read all that. What I want you to know is this. There is a unity with the whole on the God side of life, and that's where these people taught me, and it really taught me about that unity with all things. Because there isn't an us and them system. It's just an us system. And it's not an us-them conflict. It's just God in motion. And so they didn't have to worry about all that other stuff. This man sits in the temple for hours at a time and leads people through prayer. That's what he does. He just leads everyone in prayer. And he teaches us, this is one of our guides, teaching us the rituals. And the rituals are purely that, rituals of cleansing and allowing ourselves to be blessed and to accept the good that we have. We have, what I realized more than ever, and is my appreciation to live in this country, to really look at traffic in a different way, to look at food in a different way, to look at clothing in a different way, to look at possessions in a different way. Not that I'm going to go and selling everything, but I am grateful, so very grateful for all the things that I have, because we have so much to be grateful for. So the rituals of things. And then this is one of my favorite shots of Lori. This is where you find the peace. In fact, we sang at the closing ceremony, by popular demand. They wanted me to sing in the silence. And I really didn't want to do that. But I did. But I changed the last line. And the last line that we sing is, we find God when we find ourselves. And what I said and what I sang at that closing was because for the 30 people that were there, we really felt in our heart and hearts that we had found that which we've been looking for. And we found it in such a profound way that I sang, we found God because we found ourselves there. We really found, it really took us to a core. And so what I would say to you, how I would couch this with you, you weren't with us, but you were. So many of you were. And I thought of so many congregants and people and people that had just made their transitions and people that were moving through transitions in their life, and you were so with us in our heart, and so much that we wanted to bring back our hearts and open them up to you in ways that we've never done this before. As you see, I haven't jumped around at all today. I'll jump next week. But it was such a profound, peaceful experience, and that encapsulates it. That we were moved, and now our goal is to help move you. And not that we're going to become Hindus. I'm not saying that. But certainly we can learn a lot from their practices of weaving through the chaos of life and finding the peace in that. Weaving through what we call our complex life and realizing how really not complex it is, because we're making it that way. We create that. But when we obey the spiritual principles, they respond back to us, and we can be centered. And now I'm not advocating that everybody go out and get prayer beads and chant 30 minutes a day and all that. No, but you got to start somewhere. Because if your life isn't at peace, I tell you what, this is a way that moves us to that place. This is our group. This group came back transformed, and they're wearing sarongs today, and I'm sure every one of them would love to share with you the journey that we had. And it wasn't a trip. It wasn't a tour. And the poor women, I felt bad because makeup didn't stick and hairs didn't stay up, and we were sweating. and nothing was air conditioned except our room, and that was barely air conditioned. And it was the most uncomfortable I've ever been, but the most at peace that I've ever been. And I've attended 14 Asilomars and gone to retreats, and I've never, ever found what we found there. And so what I would say to you is this. If you've ever been on the fence, again, you got to jump in. You got to jump in. What's interesting is that peace is the common thread that we have with all of them. And we were at one of the temples, and at one of the temples, we saw this. Well, guess what? We have that exact same peace pole in our shed here. It's in our shed because we were redoing the garden back here, and we pulled it out and stored it in the shed. But what was interesting is we actually have that same peace pole here that they had in one of their temples, which allowed us to connect the dot between us and them and realize that there really is only one agenda here. And if we can become at peace with ourselves, and I learned about being at peace with people there among the chaos, we're going to be worlds ahead. We will continue to get more and more ahead, but we have to first come at peace with ourselves, and then, try your household, and then maybe your neighborhood, and then let's push it into a community, and then let's push it into a county, and let's push it into a state and a country. How would it be if we all had that idea of peace coming from us and weaving it into our offering? Does that make sense? They're a happy group of people, man. I've never met a happier group of people. They just live peace all the time. Couple side notes. Anybody see the movie The Bucket List? Remember that Luwak coffee? Remember the coffee that came from that animal? It's fabulous. I had some. Look, yay, we had coffee. So that's my only thing. I already talked about In the Silence. That's just our group. So my story and the story that we want to bring home from Bali is this. It was 2 weeks of a transformational experience. We want to bring that love back here and help apply that experience with our principles and move us in a direction where we're weaving it more into our daily lives, not because it's time to, but because it's past due. And so end your lesson. Thank you.